A little after midnight, the city of Bhopal was asleep. 500,000 people breathing in the dark with no idea that the air itself was about to turn against them. A short walk from those neighborhoods stood a pesticide plant, and inside one of its tanks sat 40 tons of a chemical so lethal that a single breath of it could kill. By morning, thousands of those sleeping people would be gone. This is not the story of a single broken part. A refrigeration unit had been switched off to save money, a scrubber left in standby, a flare tower dead for months. This is the story of how, one quiet decision at a time, a place stopped being able to protect the people living beside it. The plant was run by Union Carbide India Limited, a subsidiary of the American Union Carbide Corporation. It made pesticides, and to make them, it relied on a chemical called methyl isocyanate. By 1984, the plant was dying. Demand for its pesticides had fallen, and it was running at roughly a quarter of its capacity. But a business in decline does not empty its tanks. One tank, designated E610, still held around 40 to 42 tons of liquid methyl isocyanate. To grasp the scale, this is not a drum or a barrel. It is a buried steel tank the size of a small bus, brimful of an acutely lethal liquid. Methyl isocyanate is dangerous in 3 ways at once. It is acutely toxic to breathe. It boils only a little above room temperature, and it reacts violently with something as ordinary as water. Because of this, the chemical was never meant to simply sit in a tank trusting to luck. It was wrapped in layer upon layer of protection, 4 independent safety systems, each one a separate wall between the chemical and the open air. The first wall was cold. A 30-ton refrigeration unit was meant to keep the MIC chilled, so it stayed a sluggish, well-behaved liquid. It had been shut down in January 1982 to save money. By June 1984, its coolant was drained away entirely. The first wall was simply gone. The second wall was a warning. A high-temperature alarm meant to cry out if the tank ever began to heat. It had been disconnected. If the chemical started to wake, no bell would ring. The third wall was the vent gas scrubber, a tower that would catch escaping gas and neutralize it with caustic soda. It sat in standby with too little caustic soda to have done its job in any case. The fourth and last wall was the flare tower, meant to burn off any gas that slipped past everything else. It was undersized for release of any scale, and it had been out of action for about 3 months. And it was not only the walls. The people were cut too. Of 12 MIC operators, only 6 remained. Supervisors were halved. Tank readings that should have happened every hour were now taken every 2. Here is the crucial point. None of these cuts on its own caused a disaster. Each was a saving, a corner quietly turned, but together they meant that on this one night, every wall was down at the same time. 4 independent defenses, all unavailable at once. All that was missing now was a trigger, and it came in the most ordinary form imaginable: water. During routine pipe cleaning that night, water, reported as about 1 ton of it, found its way through a faulty valve and a side pipe and slipped into tank E610. Inside, contaminants of metal and rust were waiting to drive the reaction harder. Water reacting with MIC is violently exothermic. It releases heat fast, and with the refrigeration gone, there was nothing to pull that heat away. So the reaction fed itself. Heat made it go faster. Faster made more heat. A chemical fire with no flame accelerating inside a sealed tank. The liquid MIC began to boil. 40 tons of contained liquid becoming an enormous expanding volume of toxic gas. Around 12:40 in the morning on the 3rd of December, the pressure won. A relief valve gave way and the gas began to vent. This is the moment the last two walls were supposed to catch it. The scrubber should have neutralized the gas. The flare should have burned it. Both were offline and both were far too small for a release this size. The gas passed straight through into the open air. In the first 45 minutes to an hour, on the order of 30 tons of MIC escaped. Within about 2 hours, the figure climbed toward 40. MIC vapor is heavier than air. It did not rise and disperse. It sank and began to roll low and silent across the ground toward the sleeping neighborhoods next door. Inside the plant, an alarm was triggered around 10 minutes to 1. A public siren was briefly sounded, and then, following company procedure, quickly silenced, so as not to alarm the public. There was no real community emergency plan, no instructions waiting, no evacuation, no one to tell 500,000 people what was happening or where to run. And so the city did not wake to a siren, it woke to the gas itself. People rose choking in the dark, their eyes and lungs burning, with no warning and nowhere to go. I will not show you what they endured. It is enough to say the harm was vast and that it fell on ordinary families asleep in their homes. By morning, the scale of it was beyond comprehension. The official record of immediate deaths was 2,259. The Madhya Pradesh government would later confirm 3,787 gas-related deaths, but independent peer-reviewed estimates put the toll within just the first weeks at 8 to 10,000. Over the 2 decades that followed, total deaths were estimated at 15 to 20,000. More than 500,000 people had been exposed. A government affidavit recorded at least 558,000 injuries, including 3,900 left with severe permanent disability. Numbers this large stop meaning anything if we let them, so hold on to this instead. Every one of them was a person who, the evening before, had simply gone to bed. Step back and the chain is brutally clear. A declining plant kept 40 tons of a lethal chemical beside a sleeping city. To save money, every safety barrier was switched off, drained, or shrunk. 1 ton of water reached the tank. The reaction ran away. The dead containment let it pass, and the silenced siren let the city sleep into it. Any one of those walls left standing might have held. The refrigeration could have arrested the heat. The scrubber could have caught the gas. The flare could have burned it off. The siren could have woken the city, but removed one at a time. No single decision looked catastrophic. That is the trap. That is the lesson of Bhopal. When something this lethal is kept beside where people sleep, every redundant barrier must stay funded, maintained, and live. And as little of it as possible should ever be stored that close to 500,000 people in the first place. 40 tons of poison, 1 ton of water, and 4 safety nets that no longer existed when they were needed most. The margin between an ordinary night and the worst industrial disaster in history was never bad luck. It was the choices made in the months before. Quietly to save money. This has been margin of error.